Ricardo, you can just mute yourself, and over to Joan.
Thanks very much, Phil. So as Phil said, this week it's called Safe Immune Support, and I wanted to do this because obviously of the year we've lived through. Everyone's been talking about immunity. It's a hot topic, and I'm sure some of you as well will be on drugs that affect your immune system. So there's this, I guess there's a tension between trying to support your immune system whilst not wanting to interfere with the medications that you're on for arthritis. So it's an attempt to sort of navigate a safe way through that can be quite valuable. Obviously, the immune system is incredibly complex, and I'm not an immunologist, and I'm not going to attempt to explain the finer workings of the immune system, but hopefully from today you'll have some mainly lifestyle support ideas, actually with some food ones as well, to support your immunity. So in thinking of what the immune system is, as I said, it's very complicated, but a sort of a high-level explanation might be that the immune system is a complex system with the roles of, firstly, distinguishing self from non-self, so what is us from what is not us, and then of protecting us against infections and foreign substances. So the immune system, the cells of the immune system have to, first of all, decide what they need to attack, which is the foreign substances, and what they should not attack, which is us. It's a very elaborate and ever-changing dynamic communications network. And I mean, that's just a starter of some of the cells of the immune system. We've got macrophages, which can swallow up pathogens. They almost envelop them in their arms and swallow them. We've got T cells, we've got B cells, which produce antibodies. We've got natural killer cells, which can take out tumor cells, I guess. So we have all these different cells of the immune system communicating with the rest of our body and with each other. As you may know, in most of the time, the immune system should be non-reactive. So most of the time it's exposed to us and our cells, and it should not attack us in our cells. But as you may know, in autoimmunity, the immune system is hyperreactive, really. So it mistakenly attacks ourself, and in the case of an autoimmune arthritis, attacks the joints in place instead of attacking foreign pathogens, or as well as attacking foreign pathogens. What happens in autoimmunity is that we get antibodies against our own tissue, which they attach onto components of our own cells, and this attracts other cells of the immune system to attack our cells. And in the process, inflammation that we've been talking about for the last 9 weeks really occurs. So anytime there's inflammation going on, that's as a result really of an immune response. So part of the immune response is to attract lots of white blood cells to the site of the attack, if you like, and all those extra blood cells and blood flow, etc., to the site create inflammation, which can be what cause pain. And medical treatments then work to reduce the inflammation, but in order to do this, they may also suppress the immune system, because it's the immune system that's caused the inflammation in the first place. What can we do when we're already taking medication, perhaps, which suppress this? Well, I've seen so many posts over the last year that I'm sick of seeing them talking about boosting your immunity. And I really, really dislike the phrase boost your immunity, because as I've said, the immune system is so complicated that we want to really support our bodies in their own wisdom to do the right thing with our immune system, rather than forcibly trying to boost immunity. Because if we think of boosting immunity, we could, potentially could we trigger the immune system into being hyperreactive like an autoimmunity. So a better phraseology would be to support our immune system. And definitely, if you're on medications that suppress your immune system, we don't want to boost the immune system and counteract the actions of medications. Different drugs have different targets in terms of the inflammatory molecules that they're targeting. And the immune system is so highly complex that it's really best, from a nutrition and lifestyle point of view, I think, not to try to get into too much detail, actually, because we don't have the evidence for exactly what mechanisms are occurring and what we're meddling with in a way. So I think it's best as much as possible to try and put what I call high level interventions in place. And just because interventions are high level doesn't mean that they don't trickle down and be surprisingly powerful. What I mean by high level interventions are often lifestyle approaches. So things like managing stress, getting enough sleep, laughing, having enough exercise, but not too much either, and making sure that your vitamin D levels are optimal. Those are all, those are all interventions that do little harm, that work on a variety of mechanisms within the body, and you can do them without needing to know exactly what biological pathway in the body you're affecting. So stress management works on the immune system in a number of ways, for instance, and you don't necessarily need to know what it's doing in order just to be assured that it's going to have a benefit. Just because it's not a fancy drug or a fancy supplement does not mean that these aren't very powerful interventions. So I often see clients skipping these things and wanting to get into very detailed nutrition, supplements, very complex approaches, whilst thinking that they can leave out these more broader lifestyle approaches. But I just really wanted to pause on this for a minute and say that these are so important and have such wide-ranging downstream effects that we really can't overstate their importance. And you shouldn't think that just because they seem obvious and easy to do, that they aren't very, very effective. So I'm going to go through and talk about each of those. And also then you can get into more personalized support as well. So the things that you would not necessarily know how to support by yourself. So in the immune system, before we get into what's happening in the bloodstream with white blood cells, we also have various barriers in the body that prevent microbes or toxins from getting into the bloodstream in the first place. So every time we have a barrier like the skin covers our body and stops us from getting infection. So that's why obvious things like it's important to keep cuts clean. If people are subjected to burns and their skin is compromised, that can be a high risk of infection. So we know that the skin, for example, is one barrier. So that's a form of our immune system that stops us from being prone to infections. We also have other physical sort of barriers that toxins or pathogens would encounter before they can get into our bloodstream. So our saliva, for instance, has immune cells in it which respond to pathogens. Our stomach is filled with acid, which can neutralize pathogens as well. So it's very important to keep those barriers healthy. Other things we can do through nutrition and lifestyle, we can resolve inflammation or reduce inflammation, support controlling inflammation as best we can. And we talked about this in the first week when we talked about an anti-inflammatory diet and lifestyle. We can talk a bit later about nutrient deficiencies that can contribute to reduced immunity. Gut health is obviously very important for the immune system. We spoke about how about 70% of the immune system is in the gut, and prebiotics, those fibers that we talked about in week 4 that feed the good bacteria in the gut, are a very safe way to support the immunity in your gut. Actually, having a balanced blood sugar level is a really good way to reduce inflammation and to keep your immune system in tip-top condition. We talked about that in week 5. And then finally, whenever there is inflammation and the immune system is activated, that results in a lot of oxidative stress. So we need antioxidant support. So I'm going to talk about these later. So these are like the ones that are in bold here are the issues that we haven't really talked about so much in these talks yet. So I'm going to deal with those later on. But first of all, just going back to the sort of what I call the high level lifestyle support aspects for supporting your immune system. And we're going to start off with stress, because most of us are exposed to it, and I do think it's one of the #1 things that's involved in chronic health conditions is how we respond to stress. So chronic stress impairs our immune response. Stress hormones stop many of the cells of our immune system from functioning properly, including our T cells, our B cells, which produce antibodies. And stress can also stop our immune system from producing the molecules it needs to produce to mount an effective immune response. So there are various studies have looked at trying to assess how chronic stress might influence how much people pick up infections, for example. And going way back to 1991, nearly 400 people were asked to self-assess their own stress that they've been under via a questionnaire. And then they had 5 different viruses squirted up their nose. And the researchers watched to see whether there was any link between self-reported stress levels and infection levels. And it was found that when they divided the people's stress into four quartiles, the people who said that they had the highest levels of stress were nearly 6 times more likely to become infected than the people in the lowest stress quartile. So that's when they're subject very directly to the same infections. And the rate of developing symptoms once they were infected was over twice as high in the people with the highest stress levels. We also know that stress, very pertinent at the moment, can diminish vaccine responses. It also slows wound healing, and it can alter the course of autoimmune diseases as well. So big links between stress and immunity, with research going back 30 years there. Things we can do. I'm sure some of you are doing lots of these, but it never hurts to remind ourselves of what we can do to change our response to stress, because it's not so much the stress in our lives, it's how we respond to that stress that seems to matter in terms of influencing our health. Yoga has been very studied in terms of reducing stress levels, and also things like meditation or prayer, breathing exercises, they all have the same sort of end result of calming the body. So when you get a copy of the slides, I've put a couple of suggestions here that are really easy ways to start with breathing exercises or some brief mindfulness meditation. The first one is called the 3-minute breathing space, and that's a very, very short mindfulness exercise that, as the name suggests, only takes 3 minutes, which you could fit into your day and multiple times in the day, just to take a break from the stresses that are going on around you. Another really useful thing is a breath pacer, which is just a timed it's usually a circle expanding and contracting, timing when you breathe in and breathe out. And just by slowing the breath down, we can get into a much more relaxed state as we breathe along with the pacer. So even if you think that meditation, for instance, is a bit out there for you, then just doing some really simple breathing exercises to slow your breath down can really help in times of stress. Other things that people like doing, and it's highly personal what you do to cope with stress, spending time in nature is very relaxing, and is now being studied, for people with mental health problems as well. So we get a lot of benefits against stress and immune boosting benefits from spending time in nature. Sometimes, rather than stopping thinking deliberately, which is what maybe meditation or breathing exercises would encourage you to do, if we're involved in doing something creative, that facilitates a state called flow. And flow is like when you're completely absorbed in what you're doing and you don't notice the time going past. So perhaps you enjoy knitting and you get into flow, or gardening, or mindfulness coloring. There are all sorts of activities that you can do that facilitate flow. Caffeine exacerbates the stress response. It results in a release of adrenaline, noradrenaline. So depending how much you drink, reducing your caffeine intake can be helpful. And moderate exercise, which we'll talk about in a minute, amongst its many benefits, can reduce stress levels. After stress, I'd say probably the second or maybe equal to stress in terms of its impact is the impact of sleep on our immune system. And there's a two-way relationship actually between sleep and immunity, which is to say that when we have an infection, when our immune system is very activated, we want to sleep more. That's our instinct and our body's means of trying to recuperate and recover. But also, when we don't get enough sleep, the ability of our immune system to fight infection falls. So a similar study to the one that was done on stress and viruses, another study, their sleep was measured by actigraphy, which is like one of the wearable sort of devices that you can get, like a watch that tracks sleep. And then they had the common cold virus administered in their noses, and the lack of sleep was the biggest predictor of catching cold, not age or body mass index or anything else. It was lack of sleep. The participants who slept less than 5 hours a night were 4.5 times more likely to catch cold than those who slept for 7 hours a night. So, you know, I'm sure there's a variety of people on the call in terms of how well we sleep, but, you know, 5 hours sleep a night, in my experience, is not hugely unusual in terms of the spectrum of what people get sleep per night. But it might not seem like majorly sleep deprived, but it has a massive impact on your immune system. In thinking of vaccinations at the moment as well, we also know that getting sufficient sleep supports a robust immune response to vaccinations for the flu, to hepatitis A and B, and the swine flu vaccine as well. So an interesting study that was done on the flu vaccine, some subjects in this study had their sleep restricted to 4 hours per night for 4 days before and 2 days after they got the flu shot. And they had antibody titers, so antibody measures, half those of the participants who had 7.5 to 8 hours sleep per night. So they've only got half the antibody response in terms of numbers of antibodies that the people who got enough sleep did. Similarly, for the hepatitis B vaccine, every additional hour of sleep that people got was associated with a 50% increase in antibody titers, and that also did translate into clinical protection. They went back and looked at those people 3-6 months down the line and looked at how many had become infected, and sleep was, so it's not just a theoretical measure looking at antibodies, it also translated into clinical protection. I'm not aware of this research at the moment around the COVID vaccine, but given how essential sleep is for our immunity, it would seem to make sense to make sure that you're getting enough sleep. But it's all very well saying to get enough sleep. It's not as easy as that for a lot of people. And it's one of those things where the more you realize that it's good for you, the more stressed you can get if you find it hard to get to sleep. So I'm very aware of that. My top tips for trying to help with sleep are, firstly, to prioritize sleep and set enough time aside. Never ceases to amaze me how people say they don't get enough sleep, but they don't get to bed until midnight and they have to get up at 6 o'clock in the morning. So you physically need to work out being aware that you're not going to get to sleep the minute your head hits the pillow. You need to set enough time aside and work backwards as to what that means in terms of when you're heading upstairs to bed. Avoiding blue light. This is the light that's emitted from smartphones and computers, as the picture suggests. Smartphones and people being on social media in the evening, I think, have had a massive impact on our sleep as a society. When our eyes see the type of light that is emitted from smartphones and computers, it has got more of the blue color of the spectrum in it. And normally our brain perceives that blue color as being from sunlight in the morning. So when we see blue light, it shuts down or suppresses our brain's production of the sleep hormone melatonin. So actually being exposed to laptop screens, computer screens, smartphone screens before you go to bed can prevent you from producing the right hormones to go to sleep. So if you suffer from finding it hard to get to sleep at night, switching off your phone an hour or two ideally before you go to bed is the best thing to do. If you really can't do that, you can get blue light filters for phones and for laptops, and you can also buy amber colored glasses to wear if you really need to use the computer late at night, that filter out the blue light whilst allowing you to see the rest of the images. Can't overstate the importance of that one, really. Keeping your bedroom at a cool temperature is really important, as our body temperature needs to drop in order for us to be able to get to sleep at night. Avoiding strenuous exercise in the evening and having a bedtime routine can both really help. And there are some herbal teas that have a long history of use at helping us to get to sleep. So valerian, chamomile, lavender, or even some drops of lavender oil on the pillow can help as well for some people, just to relax and calm the nervous system so that we can sleep better. The next high level sort of support, as I call it, is often overlooked, and that's the impact of laughter. So there isn't very robust research on this, but it does seem from smaller studies that laughter increases natural killer cells and T cells, but it also reduces stress. So by the mechanisms through which stress improves our immune response, then laughter should do so as well. So sometimes if we're struggling with pain or chronic illness, it can we can get a bit bogged down in it, but finding ways to laugh, subscribing to some of your favorite comedy series or getting box sets just to make yourself laugh can be an extra thing that you can do for your health. Exercise influences immunity in multiple ways, and again, there's a lot of research all looking at slightly different things in different populations of people. Not all the research agrees, but the consensus seems to be that moderate exercise seems to improve immune function, whereas too much or too little suppresses it. We definitely know that too little exercise suppresses it. There are some questions around whether too much exercise really does or not, and many of us are not in that danger category of doing too much exercise anyway. Yoga has been extensively studied, and I know you've got your yoga classes as well. So yoga does reduce inflammation, and if you practice it long term, the effects seem to take months rather than days to develop, but there do seem to be immune enhancing effects with longer practice. Interestingly, when it comes to COVID-19, there was a study that came out earlier this month in, I think, the British Journal of Sports Nutrition, which looked at the hospital records of 50,000 people in America who were diagnosed with COVID-19. And on admission to this particular hospital, patients were asked about their physical activity during the week preceding their admission. So this study was looking at the outcomes of COVID-19 in these patients and looking at whether there was a correlation between that and the physical activity that they had reported before they were admitted. And the results were quite remarkable. The researchers divided the patients into 3 groups in terms of their exercise. So the least active had done less than 10 minutes of moderate exercise, which was sort of equivalent to a brisk walk or more in the previous week. So lowest level, less than 10 minutes. The highest third had done at least 150 minutes over the course of a week of this moderate exercise. And then there was a group that was somewhere in the middle. The least active group were 2.5 times more likely to die from COVID-19 than the most active. And the least active were 30% more likely to die than the people who'd done that sort of moderate group. And this study was large study, 50,000 people. It was controlled for other factors like body mass index, age, other illnesses. So it's not, of course, proving causation, it's just a correlation, but it did seem to be, there were quite big differences in terms of how physical activity seemed to influence or was related to COVID outcomes. In a similar way to exercise, we're starting to gather quite a lot of data on vitamin D and its relationship with COVID and other respiratory illnesses as well, and the immune system in general. And vitamin D, I think of as another high-level controller of the immune system. It improves the function of a group of immune cells called regulatory T cells. So these regulatory T cells can sort of either ramp up an immune response or calm it down whenever it's appropriate to shut off that immune response. So vitamin D can encourage these regulatory T cells to move the body away from this sort of tendency to attack the body, so a tendency to autoimmunity. There are associations between low vitamin D and upper respiratory tract infections, as well as more severe cases of COVID. And low levels of vitamin D have been associated with lots of different autoimmune conditions. And interestingly, there are associations as well between vitamin D and pain levels in musculoskeletal pain conditions generally. And in osteoarthritis, well, hip and knee osteoarthritis progressed more rapidly in one study in those who were insufficient in vitamin D. So vitamin D encourages our immune cells to differentiate, specialize in a way that promotes being tolerant of self. So I said that the immune system has to discriminate between whether it thinks our own cells are safe or whether they're a threat. And it does tend to make us more tolerant to our own cells. So that's thought to be the link between it and autoimmune conditions. In the UK, we can only make vitamin D from UVB light in the sunshine, sort of from April through to September. And this is to do with how intense the rays of sunlight are falling on our skin. And we make vitamin D through the action of sunlight falling on our skin. So it goes without saying that we can only make it if our skin is exposed. So if you never go outside between April and September, or if you're always covered up when you're outside, you're not going to make very much vitamin D. Food, a lot of people say I'd rather get vitamin D through food. Well, food only provides small amounts of vitamin D. So the foods that provide the most are probably eggs, liver, or oily fish. And also mushrooms. Mushrooms, they can synthesize vitamin D via ultraviolet light, like we can. So if you leave your mushrooms on in direct sunlight for 20 minutes to an hour before you're going to prepare and eat them, then they will have absorbed actually quite a significant amount of vitamin D, possibly more than you could get through the eggs, liver, or oily fish. But it is quite difficult generally to get significant vitamin D through food. So if you haven't got enough through sunshine, then the most reliable way to increase your vitamin D levels are to take a supplement. However, I'd never recommend anybody takes a high level dose of vitamin D without checking their own blood levels of vitamin D. In non-COVID times, you can probably do this through your GP, but if that's difficult at the moment, then that website, vitamindtest.org.uk, is an NHS lab that also sells finger prick vitamin D tests direct to public. I think it's £29 for one test. So they are experiencing, as you could imagine at the moment, quite a lot of interest. So their turnaround time is a few weeks rather than a day or two at the moment. But it's an NHS lab, and it's one of the cheapest ways of getting your vitamin D measured if you have to do it privately. When you get your results back, they're usually classed into insufficient or sufficient, but it's worth noting that NHS sufficient levels are based on avoiding musculoskeletal disease such as rickets, rather than what is optimal for immune health. So the NHS guidelines on serum vitamin D levels do not take immune health parameters into consideration at the moment. So what is deemed sufficient in terms of musculoskeletal health is usually a figure of 50 nanomoles per litre or above. So if your result comes back and it's over 50, that will say sufficient. In terms of what is optimum for immunity, there is no consensus as far as NHS guidelines are concerned. Various papers on the subject have suggested that for people with autoimmune conditions, that serum levels of 100 to 150 may be optimal for optimum functioning of the immune system. Vitamin D, if you supplement too much of it, can cause toxicity, but there is no toxicity seen up to about 200 nanomoles per litre. So my view is that you should always test before supplementing, and then know what the figure is before you decide how much to take. The vitamin D recommendations from from Public Health England that adults in the UK should take 400 international units of vitamin D daily may be enough to maintain vitamin D levels. It's probably not enough to increase them very rapidly. If you had low vitamin D levels and you wanted to increase your vitamin D for immunity. So I'm being a little bit controversial here because that's not in accordance with what Public Health England were to say, but I'm talking to you as an audience of people who would want to, I guess, optimize your vitamin D levels in terms of musculoskeletal pain, but also in wanting to optimize the function of your immune system if you've got an autoimmune arthritis. And that's what the bulk of the evidence is saying. So those are the sort of high level interventions that I said, the stress, sleep, laughter, exercise, and vitamin D. And as I said, you can't underestimate the importance of all those, because you act at a high level in doing those, and the trickle down into various parts of our immune system is significant with all of those. Looking in a little bit more detail at things that we can do through nutrition, I mentioned skin and barrier health. So we have all these physical barriers in the body, which are our first line of defense against infection. So I mentioned skin and saliva. Our tears also have immunoglobulins in them to protect our eyes. And importantly, our stomach is filled with acid because we are exposed to a lot of pathogens potentially through our food supply. So it's really important that our stomach is very acidic to kill off some of these bugs. And I'd refer you back, I guess, to the video I did about how to eat to improve the functioning of your digestive system, where in order to have good levels of stomach acid to protect us against infection, it's quite important to take your time over eating, to be relaxed, to maybe do some of those breathing exercises before you eat, to chew your food well, to not eat while you're stressed, listening to the news or checking your emails or whatever stresses you out. So those things can help with good stomach acid production as well. Keeping these barriers healthy can prevent the immune system from getting activated in the first place. So if we keep, enough saliva in our mouth, thinking about what we were talking about last week about oral health and not letting our mouth get dry, then we can hopefully stop the need for our immune system having to do so much work at all. So the next couple of slides are about nutrients that can help with this, really, with predominantly the health of these barriers and secretions in our body. The first one is vitamin A. Vitamin A, as I say, supports the health of these mucus linings. So the lining of our mouth, the lining of our gut, linings throughout our body generally. And vitamin A also helps various cells of the immune system to become differentiated, which is like learning to specialize as to how to do their job really well. And vitamin A also reduces inflammation. It may also be important for vaccine efficacy. But we don't have that data on the coronavirus vaccines. So where do we get vitamin A from? Well, some comes from beta carotene, which comes from those brightly coloured sort of orange and green vegetables like carrots, squashes, red and orange peppers. Kale is actually quite a good source of beta carotene. And the body converts the beta carotene into vitamin A. We vary a little bit in our genetic predisposition to how well we convert beta carotene to vitamin A. So not all of us convert it as well as others. So for some people, it can make a difference to get small amounts of preformed vitamin A, which you only get from animal sources. So beta carotene from plant sources may be converted into vitamin A. Some people can do with a top up of small amounts of the animal source, and the top food source of this is liver and other organ meats. So liver, be it from chicken or beef or lamb, it's a very high source of vitamin A. There's also a concern that too much vitamin A can be toxic as well. So pregnant women are not advised to eat too much vitamin A, for instance, because of toxicity. But for many of us, I think we've gone too much the other way, and we're perhaps not getting enough vitamin A in its preformed state. And as I say, it can be very useful to some people. One dead sort of giveaway for whether you are low in vitamin A is those little spots that some people get on the backs of their arms or on their legs. I don't know if you've ever noticed it. It's not actually spots, they're just little lumps, and it's sometimes called chicken skin. It doesn't look terribly attractive. That is because vitamin A is very important for skin health as well as barrier health. You know, it's all those kinds of barriers really in the body. Without vitamin A, that kind of condition can happen to skin. I used to have this on my legs, this sort of chicken skin stuff. It's called keratosis pilaris. Mine didn't go away until I started eating chicken liver once a week, and then it all cleared up, and I'd had it for 40 years, and it all cleared up when I started to eat chicken liver. So that's just one sort of naturopathic type of sign that someone might not be converting their beta carotene to vitamin A very well, and that they might benefit from a little bit of preformed vitamin A to support their immune system and the health of their gut and their skin. Another vitamin that you'll all know about when it comes to immunity, you sort of think of it as a bit of a old school vitamin for immune health, because we've all been talking about it for so long, is vitamin C. Vitamin C doesn't actually, it has a reputation for like stopping us from getting colds, but it doesn't seem to. What it does do is that it may shorten cold duration slightly and decrease the severity of colds. But high dose vitamin C doesn't reduce the incidence of the cold, except it does seem to for people under high physical stress. So professional sports people, military personnel under high physical stress, high dose vitamin C does seem to reduce the incidence of the common cold for them. Vitamin C gets used up in our body and depleted when we're stressed. So if we're stressed, this may be one mechanism by which being under stress impairs immunity as well. It uses up our stores of vitamin C. So really important to get your vitamin C when you know you're under stress. We all know about citrus fruits containing vitamin C, but also more so than that can be other foods like peppers, leafy greens, cruciferous vegetables, and berries. They're all really good sources of vitamin C. Mushrooms are another food that are amazing in terms of immune support. And mushrooms are just fascinating in general because of the way fungi interact with the ecosystem around them. I mean, that's a whole other story about how amazing mushrooms, fungi are. But it's because of their way of communicating with animals and other plants around them, they communicate with us as well. They contain compounds called beta glucans, which actually interact with our immune system. So mushrooms are one of those foods that don't boost immunity, as it were, but they actually modulate immunity. So they can calm things down if our immune system is hyperactive, or they can make it more responsive if it's been a little bit sluggish, and that's because of how they can interact with cells of our immune system. So you may have heard of medicinal mushrooms, which are often varieties from the Far East, especially that can be used in a variety of medical conditions, but actually all mushrooms modulate the immune system. So even white button mushrooms, are really good in terms of what they do to white blood cells and our immune counts. So eating a variety because they all support immunity, but they all have slightly different benefits. Eating a variety of mushrooms can be really helpful. And I mentioned mushrooms in particular because some of the medicinal mushrooms have actually been studied for their safety of use in autoimmune conditions, to make sure that at the sort of high doses that you get when they're used medicinally, that they don't boost the immune system and make it more hyperactive and more likely to attack yourself. And it's been found that they modulate the immune system. They help it to do what's appropriate rather than just revving it up. I mentioned that whenever the immune system is attacking and whenever there's inflammation, there's something called oxidative stress that goes on in the body with that. And that's a bit like whenever there's a lot of activity in the body, there are free oxygen molecules floating around that can damage your own tissues in a process a bit like metal will get rusted. So if the immune system is chronically activated, all this can cause damage to our tissues over time, can cause aging, and we can use our diet to help us to counteract that damage by getting lots of antioxidants in our diet. Antioxidants, so against the oxidative stress. We do that by eating the rainbow. So if you can see how colorful that plate is, if you try and don't just eat your greens and maybe your oranges, but also remember to eat foods that are purple and red and yellow and brown as well, to eat all colors of the rainbow, then all the colors have sort of different antioxidants that can work together to help to reduce the effects of that inflammation. So another food, I thought I'd leave you with another recipe, which is probably more fashionable maybe 2 or 3 years ago than it is now, but it was everywhere on social media, certainly, yeah, in the last 5 years or so. I haven't seen so much about it recently, but that is what gets called nowadays bone broth, but it's just really old-fashioned, like chicken stock or stock made from simmering animal bones. I make it in a slow cooker because then you can just leave it to simmer safely for a really long time. You can also make it in a pressure cooker. You can make it on the stove top, although you need to be with it and supervise, and that's more difficult. But basically, animal bones, when you simmer them for a long time, and we're talking probably 24 hours in a slow cooker, they release a lot of nutrients which are very anti-inflammatory, can tone down an overactivation of the immune system, but they also contain nutrients from the bones, from the connective tissue of the animal, that can help support our connective tissue, so can help support the health of those barriers in the body that like the lining of the gut and our skin, so that when they're healthy, we're not subjected to so many assaults on our immune system. So when you simmer these bones for a long time, all these nutrients can seep out of the bones and into the stock that you make. So I tend to put a whole chicken carcass after I've roasted chicken into my slow cooker, top it up with water, put a few bits of leftover veg in there. You know, it doesn't really matter too much. I put in carrots, celery is what I've said here, onion. I also put in, you know, the tops of leeks or some herbs sometimes, and some peppercorns, and then I put in some apple cider vinegar because that helps with extracting the minerals and the nutrients from these bones. And then I leave it in my slow cooker on low for 24 hours. And at the end of it, you've got this lovely rich stock that's full of very anti-inflammatory nutrients, but also full of nutrients that can support the health of the lining of our gut. And if the lining of our gut is healthy, that's where most of our immune system lives, and our immune cells in the gut can interact better. It also stops more pathogens from getting into the bloodstream if it helps with the integrity of our gut lining. So you can use this resulting stock as a base for soups. You know, you can use it as liquid to make risotto, or to make a paella with, or, you know, all the ways that all the times in cooking in which you use stock. You can also, as the picture suggests, just enjoy bone broth as a as a hot drink, and that might not sound to your taste. I actually think it tastes quite nice if you add a little bit of Himalayan sea salt to it. You can also add a squeeze of lemon. Some people put a little bit of ginger in it. And in the winter, it's actually a lovely, warming, nourishing type of drink. And chicken broth made in this way, in particular, has been nicknamed over the years, has been called Jewish penicillin, as the Jewish tradition of making chicken soup for anyone who was unwell, because it can calm down some of this inflammatory response that happens in your airways when you, as a response to upper respiratory tract infection. So it can make you feel better and reduce some symptoms of a cold or flu a little bit. So I haven't made it for a while, actually. I went through a phase of making lots of bone broth, but it can be very healing for the gut and be a really nice, nourishing tonic to have if you're feeling a bit under the weather and like your immune system needs some support. Yeah, so that was what I wanted to share with you today, really, and just not to think that those high-level interventions aren't super important just because they seem obvious. Sometimes it's good just to have a reminder of the real basics, as well as some of the more technical stuff about vitamin A or vitamin D or whatever. So that was it for today, unless there's questions. And next week, as Phil said at the start, there's time for lots more questions. So please submit them to Phil for next week. But yeah, if there are any questions about any of that today, then it seems like we might have a few minutes.
Yeah, thanks, John. That's very interesting. You were talking about vitamin D and nanomasters, what they are.
Oh, that's their unit of measurement. So I just quantify the units because quite often when you look at research papers, they may be American, and it's just worth bearing in mind that Americans measure their vitamin D in a different measure, which is, I think, nanograms per milliliter. In the UK, vitamin D levels in the blood will be reported as nanomoles per litre. So there is a difference between the two in terms of the numbers that you'll see. So that's why I just mentioned what it was. Yeah. But that's not what you'll see as a dosage. That's how much someone will have in their blood. But when you see dosages of vitamin D in terms of supplements, it tends to be in international units. So, yeah.
Okay, so you did sort of say what a good level was, about 400.
No. So 400 is the amount of supplement that Public Health England are saying that everybody could do with taking. And I said that in my clinical experience, that is not enough to increase somebody's level if they were low. If you get your vitamin D level tested, either at the GP or privately, and it comes back, I like to see levels in my clients of around 100 nanomoles per litre. And that's, far above the NHS sufficient, which is 50. So I think for immune health, there's evidence that higher than the NHS sufficient of 50 is beneficial. Sorry, a lot of numbers there. I hope that makes sense.
Yeah, Rosemary.
No, Joan.
Joan, sorry.
Yeah.
I might as well change your name. Sorry. Would the chemist permit you to get the vitamin D test done there?
I don't know. I don't think my chemist takes blood from anybody, but it might be different in different parts of health trusts.
No, I'm just thinking they're all tied into the National Health now to do different bits and pieces. I wonder if they could just do the prescription for getting the vitamin D taken.
So it's only given on prescription if you have a test from your GP, I guess. I don't think that a chemist would be able to just order that test in the NHS, but I might be wrong. I've not come across it before. I don't know if anybody else knows differently, but I've not seen any chemists offering vitamin D tests the way they would check your blood pressure, for example.
Yeah.
There was a question in the chat.
Of course, you can get it checked through your GP, but trying to get any blood test at the moment is probably as difficult as it was.
Yeah.
I felt dreadful years ago. I really had to push my GP just for vitamin D tests, and it was really low. And it made such a difference having that corrected.
I find that
But I don't think it did me any good having it that low for so long.
I find some people, and this is just anecdotal reports from clients, people who don't have arthritis, but have found that when their vitamin D goes below 60, so when it was still, sufficient in NHS terms, that they felt, they got a lot of aches and pains and noticed a big difference when it went up a little bit higher for them. So it can be a cause of pain and symptoms as well.
Joan,
What's the other thing to watch too is I was prescribed vitamin D and calcium, which was not a very good idea. And thankfully I queried it with my GP because I'd been having palpitations. And the GP I spoke to said, no, I shouldn't have been on it, and told me to go to Holland and Barrett and buy a higher dose one, which I've been taking ever since.
The other thing that you can take with vitamin D, because calcium, if it doesn't get taken up by bones and mineralized into bones, can go into soft tissue or into blood vessels where it can cause harm. So I tend to advise, if people are taking higher dose vitamin D, to take a vitamin D with vitamin K, because vitamin K activates the uptake of calcium into the bone. So if you're taking a high dose vitamin D, it increases how much calcium you absorb from your gut. So it can lead to deposits on arteries and that sort of thing. So yeah, worth taking with vitamin K if you're taking a high dose vitamin D.
Joan, I was fascinated by the mushrooms being put out in the sun for a sunbathe.
Yes.
Now, if I let them sunbathe for half an hour before I cook them, and I don't use them all, and I put them back into the refrigerator, will they lose their vitamin that they've absorbed from the sun, or should I put them out again?
Oh, I think you may have to leave that one with me for next week, and I'll answer that in the Q&A, because I actually don't know. What I did note down about mushrooms was the type of levels that you can get by putting them out in the sun. I was quite surprised at. So the other foods that we tend to think of as being highest in vitamin D, salmon has about 465 international units of vitamin D per serving, so 465, whereas mushrooms, 100 grams of mushrooms in the sunshine, research found levels between 400 and 2,400 IU of vitamin D in the sunshine irradiated mushroom. It's a lot more than you can get from other foods. So definitely something that's worth doing, but I'll come back to you as to whether it declines or not. I shouldn't think it would, actually, because it's not a water soluble vitamin like vitamin C or the B vitamins that tend to just decline with storage.
I thought mushrooms had vitamin K in them as well.
They may have I think more of leafy green vegetables as having vitamin K in. Yeah. So vitamin K crops up when people are on warfarin, because it affects clotting, and it's usually the green leafy vegetables that have to be kept fairly constant for that.
There's a very long list of vegetables and fruit you can't eat, or you should only eat in moderation if you are taking warfarin.
I used to be on warfarin, and I thought a rather enlightened hematologist at the time who said to me that was rather outdated advice in his opinion, that he didn't mind how much I ate as long consistency was key. So they can change your warfarin dose, but provided you're eating, the same sort of amounts of leafy greens each day or across a week, then they can medicate you accordingly. It's when you have a lot and then stop and then have a lot that you get sort of out of control.
Yeah, David had a problem. He ate mangoes for a couple of days for his breakfast, before his test, and he failed the test. So we know mangoes are a problem. Yeah. And now we've got a list of things to eat in moderation.
Yeah. So that is actually an issue about, I said take vitamin K with high dose vitamin D if you're taking high dose, but you would need to be careful with that if you were on warfarin.
Joan, that question you come up in the chat that said, what else you said to buy apart from the blue light filters, please? That's from Farouk.
Yeah,
It's to do
so
with the sleep.
yeah, so the blue light filters, there are various free apps that you can use on your phone or on your computer. I have an Android phone and I use an app called Twilight that you can set to the light levels really go down on your phone. You can set it to happen at sunset every day, so it'll change throughout the year. But the other thing you can buy is amber glasses. So glasses with a just an amber colored filter on them will filter out the blue light. So if you need to work on your computer in the evening, I mean, you can buy those on Amazon, and you can just wear them. You can just wear them even, you know, even if you're not on your computer in the evening. I know some people who like to use them just in the same way that turning down your lights to the, you know, just lamps rather than overhead lights at night can just help to make you feel like it's time for sleep.
I have a pair of those for night driving and they're very good.
Yeah.
Reduce the headlights.
The glare, yeah.
Right.
Sorry,
Okay,
can
thanks a lot,
I just
Joan.
ask quickly about the vitamin D and vitamin C supplements? Because I was on steroids for a very, very long time, and I was advised to take the vitamin D, vitamin C supplement that you get together in that big tablet that you chew. So it's something I should really talk to them about, isn't it? Because I've been on it since. I've been on it for, well, 20 years, I think.
Well, vitamin C is not really stored in the body, so we tend to excrete what we don't use. So it's difficult ever to advise anyone unless I know you and all your medications about supplements. But if you've been on it safely, I don't tend to worry about people being on vitamin C long term because you will just weigh out what you don't use. Vitamin D, it's always worth, I think it's worth everybody getting their vitamin D levels checked, especially at this time of year when they're typically at the lowest they naturally are through the year if you're not supplementing, just so that you know where you're at and how much you should be taking. Because as Rosemary says, it can make a difference in how you feel, plus in disease terms as well. So it's worth asking for a vitamin D check and then you'll know where you are.
Yeah, I will do that. Thank you.
Thanks, Joan. Yeah, we were just, you did mention that